All right, greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here, or Adams van Sale, and tonight I'm going to be, excuse me, I hope that's not COVID-19. I'm going to have a discussion with Phil Craig. He is the co-founder of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and he's going to pretty much state the case for Cape Independence, what it means, what it entails, and also how viable and realistic it really is. Welcome on the show, Craig.
Thanks, Ernst. Pleased to be here. Thank you for having us.
So I think in terms of, rather than me reading your entire manifesto out loud on the show, I think I'm going to hand the mic to you so you can just do like a little elevator pitch if you were to meet someone and they asked you, who is the Cape Independence Advocacy Group and what do you stand for?
Sure. Okay, right. Thank you. So look, essentially we're a political lobby group. And our primary purpose is to obtain and win a referendum on Cape independence, essentially we are looking to try and bring meaningful and genuine democracy to the Western Cape, and that's premised upon the democratic will of the people, and the basis that ideologically the Cape is quite distinct from the rest of South Africa. And unfortunately, due to our democratic system, the Cape keeps electing one government and keeps getting given a different one. So what they specifically reject is what they get, obviously that is systematic and permanent. And we obviously want to try and deliver meaningful power to the people of the Western Cape, so that the government they vote for is the government that they get. And if they aren't happy with the government, they have a power to hold that government to account.
Do you have any affiliation to the Cape Party?
No, we're entirely independent. We are a member of something called the Cape Independence Forum, which is an informal, loose collection of groups that are seeking independence. So we collaborate with them and with other groups like Cape Exit and the United Liberty Alliance and Sovereign State of Good Hope to a lesser extent. But no, we're independent.
And is your group specifically something new, or is it something that has been around a while, but you've only now started gaining steam? What's the timeline in regards to your existence?
We launched our website about 5 weeks ago, so we're new, and I think we've made a fair splash on the scene, which is great. We've obviously come with a slightly different message, but no, we're new, but we mean business, and we're here, and we've got a very definite plan, and we didn't come to be spectators in the process.
And you mentioned there that you work closely with other organizations and movements that share your vision, or not perfectly mirror your vision, but rather that they share a broad vision for an independent Cape. But this type of movement and this type of connection that you have to these movements are more groups joining you, or are more people joining the already existent groups, or is this movement of yours, this broad movement or broad church, increasingly diversifying with a lot more movements like yours?
Well, look, so I think there are sort of small groups that splinter, but probably the big ones are fairly stable. We're probably the only sizable group that's kind of burst onto the scene with something slightly different, and it's fine because each of the groups has a slightly different mission. We're obviously all seeking independence. We tend to have different strategies, which is great, and we tend to have a slightly different constituencies. So between us, we hope that we would cover all of the bases, and obviously all of the groups will think they've got the answer, so we don't agree on everything, but ultimately we're working to the same goal, and it makes sense to collaborate wherever it's possible to do so. I think for us, we've got certain moral values, and which we won't compromise on. But providing we're not called to compromise on our moral values, then we'll work with anybody that's seeking the same thing that we are.
But then also at the same time, do you think this movement of yours is gaining steam? Do you see this idea really gaining traction in the past few years, or is the slow, more incremental process from your perspective being in the thick of it?
No, look. So if you asked us, so look, at this point in time, everything we touch seems to turn to gold, and we are eternally grateful for that. And I think that probably is a mixture of the timing's very good, with the sort of current political climate. I think we've come with a message that is a mainstream message and probably has got more legs than some of the other messages that are out there. My colleagues would absolutely want me to say there's a degree of provenance in there, and maybe this is what's meant to happen. And I hope that's the case. But look, if I look at what we've achieved in 5, 6 weeks, I have look. Obviously, there was some planning that went into it before that. But we launched the website 5 or 6 weeks ago, and what we've achieved in those 5 to 6 weeks is nothing short of miraculous. In that time, we've probably done about 10 or 12 of these interviews. We've had about 5 or 6 articles published in 10 different newspapers. We have been approached by a number of seriously influential figures, both in civil society and in politics. We're talking to people inside of the DA. And those are all doors that have beaten their path to us, as opposed to the other way around. We were sort of still finding our feet, and we realized that, hang on a second, this is just seriously resonating with people. So we're not the only people. The other independence organizations are showing massive growth at the moment. So I think there's a number of factors, but it's an idea that's coming its time. It's coming of age now, and it's starting to move across from the sort of fringes into the mainstream media. You'll see that the Institute of Race Relations is now talking about it. Progress SA was talking about it. The DA finally broke their silence on it, although we worked quite hard to make them break their silence on it. It's a good time to be in the independence movement. Is independence a surefire thing? No, it's not. It's uphill struggle, and there's an awful lot of work to be done. Is it impossible? By no means is it impossible. I think at this point in time, I would give us a 50-50 chance.
Well, I like those odds.
Me too.
So, seeing as you're a very young movement so far, in regards to your founding, in what phase are you currently? Are you, like, for example, in the fundraising phase, the building awareness phase? What type of actions are you being preoccupied with at this current stage?
So we are. So I guess we're in that crossover stage from obviously we did the initial planning stage, and then I guess we kind of have the sort of foundation stage, and moving across into into the sort of the action stage, and we're probably caught between those two stages. So I would say we should be in the foundation stage, and there are certain things that we are still building because we plan to be in the foundation stage. But the reality is that because things have moved so far and so fast, that objectives that we probably had for 6 months down the line, we are already ticking off at a reasonable rate. So to a certain extent, our strategy is developing as we respond to things that just arrive at our door. But look, we if we looked at what we wanted to do to start off with, we wanted to establish connections with the other groups and try and find some common symbols that we could rally around as a broad movement. Fortunately, other people were like-minded, so that's at quite an advanced stage now. We obviously need to set up our website and social media, and that's up and doing really, really well, and we're attracting really quite significant numbers of people to that, which funny enough isn't our core aim. We're a political lobby group, but it's great that people are there because activists and word of mouth is fantastic. We've started to get some media channels that are working with us on a regular basis, which is fantastic. So those things are all going very, very well. Obviously, we've got to sort of get some visibility out there, and that's probably the next step that's coming on. So we have got plans in that regard, and in terms of polling will be our next step. And so our first major fundraising was to try and collect enough money for a political poll, and that obviously you'll know that's quite substantial sums of money, but it looks like we just about have all the money in place now for our first political poll, and some of the donors have been extraordinarily generous, and we've quickly got to a place where we didn't really expect to be. So we will shortly be carrying out our first independent poll.
So that poll specifically, will it be only a Western Cape thing? Will it be targeted in certain areas, maybe Cape Town, or what will be the extent of this poll be?
No, it'll only be the Western Cape, because we're only focused on the Western Cape. For us, it's about, when we talk about Cape Independence, we primarily mean Western Cape Independence. Look, those borders may develop over time democratically, but our primary focus is very specifically the Western Cape, and that polling will be throughout the Western Cape. So it'll be a top-notch international standard, best practice poll, because there's no point in having any other data than that. You've seen it yourself. There have been polls there. The Cape Party ran a poll which actually was very credible, but because it wasn't run by an organisation that people could relate to, people dismissed it because they wanted to dismiss it. So we're talking to internationally recognised organisations that nobody can dismiss. So if we come with a result and say, listen, 40% of people in the Cape already want independence, or 60%, or whatever that number is going to be, that's going to be the number.
Because that's the thing. I mentioned this quite a few times when people ask me about my thoughts on an independent Cape or the independence movement. My first go-to answer is always that I would like to first start seeing some real-world actions. And firstly, I need to put a footnote there that I do know that's very expensive, takes a lot of planning, takes a lot of effort. But as soon as I start seeing that, some real-world demonstration, maybe a march or some type of political demonstration or some type of real-world action, I think then a lot of people will start taking the movement seriously and will start taking notice. And they will, because I think that the power in that type of real-world action is that shows people are willing to put their faces to the movement, or to put action out there, rather than just filling in a petition online, or doing an online poll, or retweeting a tweet, but rather really giving up their time and effort and part of their life to pursue this goal. So I'm very curious to see what you do in that regard. Could you, you're not at that stage yet, but could you disclose a little bit of an idea of what you might be planning?
Sure. No, look, well, our first campaign isn't far away. So our first campaign is a car mirror sock campaign. So the various organisations are voting this week on a symbol that we intend to unify around. Let's call it a flag, but it can't be the country's flag. That'll be a decision for the independent state. But to all intents and purposes, a flag symbol, and that will then will be manufactured in the Cape. And we will then be selling car socks people put around their mirror, like you used to see in the South African flags for the World Cup, so that you'll start to see people driving around the Western Cape with the independent Western Cape flag on their cars, and that'll be the first symbol that, hey, I'm up for this, and people will see that other people are up for this, and I think that will be the first step that takes this movement away from our point of view anyway, away from social media, out onto the streets, so that people can identify, listen, I'm standing by this, I'm putting my name to this, and the people that haven't come across Cape Independence, because I think it's a fairly new concept to a lot of people, even if they don't know what it is, when they start seeing these flags driving, or these car mirror socks driving around the Cape, and people say, why do I keep seeing this symbol? Why do I keep seeing this symbol? Obviously, that then will drive interest into the movement. So that's the first thing, and I would think we're probably about 4 weeks away from that. So we're not a long way away. We've got a manufacturer lined up. We've got the funds in place. Actually, we are just waiting for. We've got a distributor in place. We've got a shop, an online shop where people can buy them, and we're still trying to set some other channels. But so essentially, we're just waiting for agreement across all of the groups about the symbol that we can use. And once we've got that, then we'll be going. So that'll be the first thing that people will see.
For me, the first thing that comes to mind when I hear Cape Independence is some of the maps that I've seen on social media, because I think that's very important. And you've mentioned now earlier that you're focusing on the Western Cape, but I've seen some wacky proposals in regards to just give us Cape Town, Bloemfontein, Pretoria, Johannesburg, and Port Elizabeth, and you can have the rest. But I haven't gotten the impression that that's your idea. But could you maybe, because I see a lot of people have been asking in terms of what area you are focusing on, can you enlighten us on that specifically?
Sure. Look, so we're very specific about where we start. So let's just kind of understand why that's the case. For a territory to secede under international law, in practice, it has to have three things. It has to have a political authority. It has to have a territorial or a geographical boundary, and it has to have a people. And they're the three things. And if you've got those three things, you can be a country, you can secede. So the Western Cape just is the ideal place to start. There already is a government of the Western Cape. There already is a provincial boundary for the Western Cape, and there's already a people of the Western Cape that are an electorate and an economic unit and everything else that goes with that. So it makes complete sense. And more than that, we know how they vote. It's not a mystery. The Western Cape, the IEC has got all of the data. You can go onto the dashboard and see how the Western Cape has voted. It fundamentally has different ideologies, has different political views to the rest of South Africa, and it's a stark contrast. So we are starting absolutely with the Western Cape. And in practice, look, obviously different organizations have got different proposals, but in reality, when we come to a referendum, the referendum will be on the Western Cape. That's what it's going to be on. Whether we then tag on to that, some other things remains to be seen. And I think that there clearly is an argument. Look, for us, the democratic will of the people is our absolutely watchword for everything we discuss. We're not interested in making decisions on behalf of the people of the Western Cape or on behalf of anybody else. We're interested in allowing the people of the Western Cape to make decisions for themselves. So ultimately, we're working towards a referendum, which is the purest form of the democratic expression of the will of the people. And once we've defined it, so let's imagine a scenario where we've had a referendum, or we're having a referendum on the Western Cape, and we're deciding whether we're going to secede from South Africa. Clearly, there are going to be territories along that border that are going to say, well, look, you know what, actually, if the Western Cape is going to be an independent country, we don't want to be stuck on the other side of the border in South Africa, right next to it. And I think at that point in time, we'd have to find out the right way to handle that process. But effectively, at municipal level, we'd like to see a system where municipalities, both inside and outside, to be fair, are able to decide whether they want to be in the independent Cape or whether they want to be in South Africa. And if you look at the political map, probably it's a bit of a blunt comparison, but I think it probably stands a fair degree of scrutiny. And if you look and see where people vote DA, then broadly speaking, they're not aligned with the rest of South Africa. If you, certainly the southern section of the Northern Cape and the western section of the Eastern Cape is almost exclusively DA. And I'm sure, once the Western Cape border is defined, a municipality on that border, but on the Eastern Cape side of the border that has a clear DA majority is very likely to want to come into the Western Cape, independent Western Cape, as opposed to remain in the ANC controlled Eastern Cape. So there'll be some balancing at the end of that, but we specifically, our starting point is the Western Cape.
And I see here, I just want to give some attention to the chat. Thank you very much, everyone that tuned in. Bernard here asks, the biggest problem with Cape Independence is that you can't register. It's more of an info website, or am I mistaken? So he's basically asking what he can do to be part of, or to contribute, or to register. Is there any way that he can do that?
Look, fantastic. All right, thank you, Bernard. That's kind of you. The best thing to register is just go to our Facebook page and like us. And as you like us on the Facebook page, you'll end up be linked to that page, and you'll get updates, and you can follow the page and so on. We're slightly different to the other organisations in terms of we don't have members, and we don't have mandates. Ultimately, we're a political lobby group. So our primary focus is to work at a slightly different level to the other organisations. We're not trying to get 1 million mandates or 1 million votes. We are trying to get to 50 really influential people in the Western Cape, and through them to spread the message of independence to everybody else. So we have a number of focuses. The political focus is the main one. So we are working very hard to put pressure on the DA to declare our hand in here and to engage them into the debate. One, because we have it on very good authority, and look, we have contacts with a number of people inside the DA themselves. Look, it's an open secret that within the Western Cape DA, a very large number of people, whether it's a majority or not, I can't tell you, but a very large number of people within the Western Cape DA actually want independence. That hasn't been declared yet, and I don't think it's even been declared internally, but it's understood, and we talk to those people. So that's a fact that's happening, because I've personally spoken to many of those people myself. Yeah, a big part of our work is with them, and then obviously with the media houses and doing stuff like this. And so therefore we have quite a small team of people that are really focused. And obviously we have people that help us with fundraising. We have people that help us open up doors and channels, and there's a section on our website where you can email us, and when you do that, we normally go back and ask you, listen, what are your skills, what is it you want to bring to the cause? If you want to come and help us fundraise, great. If you have some political contacts, if you could introduce us to Rupert Murdoch, Murdoch's the wrong thing, sorry, but influential people, or whoever it's going to be, then fantastic, then come and do that, or follow us on Facebook. But we don't have a membership scheme, and we're not collecting mandates, because that's not how our organization will get this done. We're trying to operate at a more strategic level. So sorry, a very long answer to your question, Bernard, and apologies for going around the houses, but go to our Facebook page. Also, I think it's Free the Cape, but you'll find it there under the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Like us, and there's a big community of people there, and that's a good place to start.
And I see a lot of people asking in the chat. AlphaGo asking, you put a link in the chat, please. Yes, there is a link in the description of this video to the website, but also to Craig's Twitter, so you can go check that out in your free time. I hope you find it interesting or informative. But now something, Craig, that I mentioned when I talked to Jeremy now on his show regarding when one of the questions in the chat was, they're asking me about Cape Independence. And I brought up the case of Catalonia, where you had millions of people in the streets marching. I don't remember what year, but I think it was 2017. And you had this very big, very globally recognized secessionist movement, but they didn't succeed. It seems like the Spanish government has pretty much squashed that movement. And then I asked, but how can you expect the Cape secessionists to succeed if a movement like that with millions of people in the streets can't even get their secession?
Yeah, so Catalonia in many ways is a great example of everything that can go wrong from both sides. And I think Catalonia is one of the examples that really is misunderstood by virtually everybody. So they draw the wrong conclusions out of Catalonia. So in terms of and I haven't got the numbers in front of me. So if I'm out for a year, then please forgive me. But the gist of it's right. So Catalonia was given additional autonomy. It's an autonomous region in Spain, and they were given increased autonomy to manage their own affairs. And I think that was in 2006. And then in 2010, the Spanish Constitutional Court revoked most or all of those powers and took the autonomous powers back. So first of all, for everybody that's saying, look, why don't we do federal autonomy rather than independence for the Western Cape? Well, there's a lesson straight away. If the Spanish can revoke federal autonomy, then I think we can be fairly certain that the ANC post Cyril Ramaphosa with Ace Magashule and all of his crooks are certainly not going to honour any deal that's made anyway. So that was the starting point, the real upheaval with Catalonia. Then let's look at the numbers next of all. When that started to take off, there was a fair bit of opinion polls done, and the starting support for Catalonia independence was 20%. So at the start of their movement, 20% of the population wanted Catalonia independence. And that's highly significant, because the only decent poll that we've got so far, which is the Cape Party poll that was conducted in 2019, showed that the starting levels of support in the Western Cape were in the 40s. So potentially in the Western Cape, if those numbers are correct, because it's not our poll, but we have actually spoken to the person that did the polling and confirmed that they are suitably qualified. So I think it's got more credibility than maybe some people give it. But if those numbers are correct, then the starting point in the Western Cape is double what the starting point was in Catalonia. Then what happened was the Spanish Constitution prohibits secession. So it's a slightly different situation to the South African one. It's not illegal in South Africa to advocate for Cape independence, it's not so. And at least there's a nod to self-determination in the South African Constitution, which there clearly isn't in the Spanish Constitution. So the Catalonians then decided they wanted to hold a referendum. And the Constitutional Court ruled that the referendum was illegal before it took place. And the highest, and there was various opinion polls taken in Catalonia, the highest level of support ever for Catalonian independence was 48%. So at no point did the majority of people in Catalonia want independence. So therefore, it wasn't the expression of the democratic will of the people. Actually, it was the independence movement trying to force through something with a minority support. And having had the referendum ruled illegal, the independence movement went ahead with it anyway, and only one side took part, which is why you have this 90% of people voted in favour of independence. But that was 90% of one side because the other side boycotted it because it had already been declared illegal. So actually, and a lot of people say they were just very impatient to handle that better. They would have been better off waiting to get past the 50% support, making sure they had some kind of international support lined up. So really, it was a bit of a disaster all round. And you know, so Catalonia isn't a great example. It is a great example of people getting to the streets, which is fantastic. Like Scotland, the same. You know, or Scotland was a model example of how these things should go. But in both cases, they never got past the 50% mark, but they did take to the streets, and they were very, very vocal and very visual. And certainly, you know, I agree with you 100%. If Cape Independence is going to happen, at some point people have to get out from behind their computers and to get out onto the street. And look, our CARSOC campaign will be and it won't just be our campaign. The other groups will be doing that with us. Will be the first sign, let's call it the green shoots of a movement that's moving onto the streets. Yeah, and hopefully behind that will then start to come marches and so on. And that clearly that has to be a part of our longer term, you know, even medium term strategy. You know, we can't do this from our living rooms.
Now you mentioned something there very briefly about this whole notion of, but how would the ANC allow that? So that leads me to my next question. You are proposing basically that the ANC give up an incredibly large chunk of the South African economy, an even bigger chunk of the surface area of the country, and a large portion of the tax-paying base as well. How will you force the ANC to give up something like that, as opposed to jumping through all the hoops, getting everything right, handing this piece of paper or this referendum result to the ANC, and then just laughing in your face?
Well, look, I often use because I found that people can relate to it best. We use the example of a divorce, and actually I like to ham that up a bit more because it's more applicable. So not just a divorce, but a divorce where the husband is abusive and the wife is abused. So let's imagine a scenario where we are now, obviously in 1994 or 1910, whichever you want to look at. But let's say 94, we entered this relationship which was full of hope, and we were building a rainbow nation. We were going to move past race, and you know, the vast majority of South Africans, regardless of their colour, were committed to the new country. And so let's call that the start of the marriage. And over a period of time, the conduct of the ANC has deteriorated. The way that they've treated citizens that don't belong to them, if you like, has got worse. And I think in terms of the Western Cape, you know, the Western Cape is unique in terms of the majority of the population are ethnic minorities. The ANC discriminates against ethnic minorities. So now you've got this relationship that, for want of a better expression, has become abusive. So what we're talking about now in terms of secession is the Western Cape saying, look, you know what, we've had enough of this relationship. It doesn't work for us anymore. We want to get divorced. And I think the first point in a scenario where you wanted to get divorced is that you would start off with a sensible conversation. I think that's the conversation where we go to the ANC and we say to them, look, we've done these opinion polls. They're by Ipsos or they're by Victory Research or by whoever we end up using. Here clearly there is majority support for independence. Can we please have a referendum and determine what the democratic will of the people is? And obviously we would hope in that situation that, given their history and their association with democracy, that they would be willing to talk to us. And examples of countries that have done that, the perfect one we touched on earlier is Scotland. So Scotland had, there were stirrings of independence rhetoric, or whatever you want to say, in Scotland. Actually, the Scottish National Party only had 19.9% of the vote when they agreed to give the referendum. It was by no means to have the majority. But the UK government recognised that there was some groundswell of opinion for independence, and they agreed to give the Scottish people a referendum. There was no constitutional right; it was just a sensible agreement, and both sides agreed to be bound by the outcome. So in our scenario, in our divorce metaphor, now that's the wife sitting down with her husband and saying, look, you know what, this just doesn't work out. I want to leave. Can we just reach a sensible agreement about this? And that would be our first port of call. Most people feel that the ANC at that point would be dismissive. I'm an eternal optimist, and I think because of their heritage and because of how public and how closely associated they are with fighting off oppression and winning democratic rule, my own feeling is that through gritted teeth, probably a deal could be done. There probably would have to be some international pressure brought to bear, but I wouldn't rule out that being done. But if that doesn't happen, that is by no means. Sorry, do you want to come in there?
Please finish your thought.
But if that doesn't happen, that certainly isn't the end of the matter. And in much the same way, our divorce metaphor, if the husband says, "Look, you know what? You're never leaving me. You're mine. You're my property," and
sounds like the ANC, yes.
Then in the divorce scenario, it doesn't mean the wife can't leave, but I mean now she's going to go to an attorney and she's going to start taking other steps, and perhaps she's going to phone the very big husband of her best friend, who's going to come around and stand guard while she collects her stuff out of the house, or whatever's going to happen. And in that scenario, as long as so the key thing with independence from our perspective is we have to have the democratic will of the people. It's about what the people want. If the majority of people in the Western Cape clearly and demonstratively want to be independent, then all of the cards sit with the Western Cape at that point in time. So if the ANC have proof that the majority of people in the Western Cape want to be independent, but they won't allow them to be anyway, then it just moves them on to the next stage of the game. And that's when you start looking at unilateral declarations of independence, because the Western Cape doesn't actually need South Africa's permission to secede. The Western Cape can secede without it. A lot of focus on what does the South African Constitution say. Well, the South African Constitution is entirely irrelevant if the Western Cape wants to be a separate country. It's the Constitution of South Africa. If the Western Cape leaves South Africa, it's not the Constitution of the Western Cape. So then you start to get into this scenario of making a unilateral declaration of independence. So and there the law starts to give some fairly clear guidance. So first of all, there was a judgment in 2010 in the International Court of Justice in The Hague. It was to do with the Kosovos. In exactly that scenario, Kosovo was part of Serbia. It was after the war there. Kosovo wanted to leave Serbia. Serbia didn't want Kosovo to leave, and they went to the International Court of Justice, and the international, and they asked for an advisory note, and the International Court of Justice ruled that there was no law against the country making unilateral declaration of independence, and therefore Kosovo's declaration stood. But that isn't the end of the matter. But what it does mean is that the Western Cape doesn't need South Africa's permission to secede. It can just declare itself independent. What happens? In that scenario, you now have a dispute. You've now got South Africa saying, no, you're not an independent country. You're still part of South Africa. And you've got the Western Cape saying we are an independent country and we're not part of South Africa. And what happens then under international law is it just becomes a de facto decision. If the rest of the world recognizes the Western Cape as an independent country, it becomes an independent country. But if the rest of the world doesn't recognize the Western Cape as an independent country, then it doesn't happen. So again, looking for examples like that. So Bangladesh separated. So Bangladesh declared itself independent from Pakistan. Pakistan said the Bangladesh couldn't declare itself independence. Bangladesh did it anyway. India supported Bangladesh, recognized Bangladesh, and Bangladesh became a country. At broadly the same time, Biafra declared itself independent from Nigeria, but nobody recognized it, and Biafra never became independent. So the Western Cape, clearly, if it's going to make a unilateral declaration of independence, is going to have some support lined up. But there are some fairly obvious candidates, and obviously there are a certain amount of noise has already been made in talking to other countries. So I think in a situation where there was clear evidence of the majority of people in the Western Cape wanting to secede, the ANC government was refusing them the right to secede. The ANC government had discriminatory policies against the majority of the people in the territory that wanted to secede, and that territory then had some international support lined up. Then I would be fairly confident in that scenario that independence would occur.
Well, Phil, I'm going to have to unfortunately say I don't share your optimism when it comes to the ANC. I'm quite pessimistic when it comes to the ANC. This is the party whose president went to the United Nations and told them straight to their faces that there is no such thing as farm murders in South Africa. So I'm not quite sold on the goodwill of the ANC. I see it as a pretty evil political party at this stage and what it's become. But at the same time, I do think that this is going to have to be a question that you have to think about long and hard as a movement. This type of question of what will we do when the ANC doesn't allow, if we've jumped through all the hoops, you've done everything correct, and then you just hand that piece of paper to them and they laugh at you. I think that's going to be the crux of it all. And I mean, as we've seen here, you're asking for a lot. You're asking for a huge chunk of the economy. You're asking for a huge chunk of the land mass of the country and a large portion of the taxpayer base. I think a disproportionate portion of the taxpayer base. So I do think, from how I know the ANC, I don't think they're just going to give it to you out of their dedication to democracy. But at the same time, in terms of your metaphor of the divorce, I would just like to add, when you go to court for a divorce to do the settlement, at least the judge will be impartial or objective. But in the case of South Africa and Cape Independence, the ANC controls the judge. The ANC controls the judge and the policeman that you're going to call if your husband starts beating you because you want to leave. So that's just my little bit of pessimism there. But you had a very interesting explanation there in terms of how you're going to try and achieve it. But then a lot of people in the chat are asking, have you guys put any thought into a timeline? I mean, roughly, in regards to, is this a 100-year plan, a 50-year plan, a 1-month plan? What is it?
2-year plan.
2-year plan.
A 2-year plan. We hope to be calling for a referendum either at the tail end of this year or the early part of next year, and with the referendum to take place maybe 6 months later. And look, and that would be for having the referendum. Obviously, there's going to be there would be a traditional period of government from there. Just coming back in terms of the policeman, you're in your scenario of the policeman and the judge. Who's the policeman? Who do you see as the policeman?
I see the policeman as the arm of the state, the state with its monopoly on violence.
Sure. Okay. Because I look so there are some fairly obvious candidates that would look to support the Western Cape, and the two biggest trading partners in the Western Cape are the UK and Netherlands. And obviously, both of them have significant historical ties. And look, you probably picked up from the accent. I'm British by birth, so I understand the British psyche and also their behaviour very well. So I'm just going to give you some interesting parallels to understand. And I think I found a lot of South Africans don't understand the British thought process and actually things they've seen as negative could potentially be positive. So the British government post-colonialism, so post the 60s, let's say past the 60s, is absolutely fixated on the wishes of the people. So they beyond anything else, what the people want, the people must have. If the majority of people want X, Y, and Z, then they stand by it. And I'm just going to run you through some scenarios so you can understand what lengths they've been prepared to do to honour the lengths of the people. So I'm going to go through them in geographical, in chronological order. First of all, we're going to start off with Southern Rhodesia. The British were by no means fans of Robert Mugabe. And Ian Smith, having served in the Royal Air Force, was almost as British as they come. But when Smith declared unilateral independence in Rhodesia, he did it on a minority judgment. And Margaret Thatcher would have been an absolute natural ally for Ian Smith, but she refused to honour and stand by Smith because he didn't have the democratic will of the people, and they were willing to let Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, become Zimbabwe because the democratic will of the people was that they wanted independence. So that was the first one. And
just a quick comment on that, Phil. Firstly, there's a reason. Well, firstly, I think when you look at the case of Rhodesia, my gut feeling from what I've read about Ian Smith and the history of Rhodesia is that I don't think the British would have given it up, even if they had a democratic backing behind it, because the British were still thinking very much in terms of an empire back then. And that matches the ANC's thinking. The ANC also has a very imperialistic way of thinking, and that there's a reason why Ian Smith called his biography The Great Betrayal.
Yeah, but actually, he singles out the British and the South Africans as the great betrayers jointly. So look, it's a very interesting book, The Great Betrayal. I terribly written, but probably a better understanding of colonial Africa than anything else I've read. But Margaret Thatcher, I haven't
comment.
Yeah, that's fine. I haven't got the direct quote to hand, but there's a direct quote where Margaret Thatcher is directly quoted as saying, "Unfortunately, we cannot support the government because you do not have the democratic support of the majority." The next time that came into question was with the British was the Falkland Islands, and in the Falkland Islands, obviously Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, and the Falkland Islands is, for those that don't know, is this tiny outcrop in the South Atlantic, much nearer to Argentina than it is Britain. But there's a sparse population there, and the population is extremely proudly British. I don't know what the population is, but maybe it's 1,000 people, maybe it's 2,000 people. It's a tiny population, and Argentina thought that Britain wouldn't fight, but again, under Thatcher, they declared the wishes of the islanders are paramount. That was the direct quote. And Britain sent a military task force 6,000 miles to recapture the Falkland Islands because the majority wanted it. Then the next one we came onto was the Northern Ireland Agreement, and obviously the end of the troubles in Northern Ireland and partition. And they're in that situation. They signed the Good Friday Agreement. In the Good Friday Agreement, there's one clause. The one clause that the British government insisted is, unless only if the democratic will of the majority of the people of Northern Ireland want to be united, can a united Ireland happen. At any point, it's a veto that's in there. If the majority of Northern Ireland people do not want to unite with Ireland, then that's written into the agreement, and it was a non-negotiable for the British government. And then we had the example we've just talked about, Scotland, the same thing. The British government, Scotland agreed to, and then isn't quite a secession. We saw the same thing in Brexit. The British government was against broadly Brexit. Later on, the Tory party was split. So the British have got an absolute staunch belief in the wishes of the majority. So were the people of the Western Cape to have a clear democratic majority for the people that the people wanted to be independent from South Africa, not militarily but diplomatically, the British would unquestionably support them.
Okay, yeah, I get what you're saying, but then let's put that scenario. Let's widen the focus. what if the argument is that the majority of South Africans don't want to lose that chunk of the economy and that chunk of the taxpayer base that's going to definitely affect the welfare spending of the ANC? Well, can't they then argue, but the Cape, and they would label your movement divisive and not part of the national unity project or the Rainbow Nation project? Wouldn't they then be able to argue that the will of the majority of South Africans is that the Western Cape stay put and not be given independence? And wouldn't the British then also have to answer to that whim?
No, because the terms of these things are laid out. I think it's the Badinter Committee, 1989, I think, or 1991, laid out the terms for what a country would need to be, and I think that started off from the Montevideo Commission in 1933, I think it was, and then likewise in 1989 UNESCO defined what a people was. So the rules around secession are quite clear. So it's got nothing to do with what South Africa wants. It's not South Africa that's wanting to secede. It's the Cape peoples, and the Cape people don't need South Africa's permission. It's got nothing to do with South Africa. If the people of the Cape collectively decide that they want to secede, South Africa has no say in the matter. It's got nothing to do with them. You know, there is a government, a provincial government. There is a territory. It's the Western Cape. There is a people. It's the people of the Western Cape. If those people want to have independence, what South Africa wants is of no material. Legally, is of no consequence whatsoever.
Now, if you achieve your wish in an independent Cape, will Cape Townians stop referring to themselves as South Africa?
They'll have to decide for themselves, but I guess so. I guess so. Yes.
All right, and then also I think something that I'm curious about, and this is also one of the big objections that is made, or one of the criticisms that's made against your movement, is the fact of immigration. In terms of what if you get your secession, but then it starts becoming so prosperous and going so good in your part of South Africa, or actually technically not part of South Africa at that point, that a lot of people move there, they immigrate there after the material wealth, but they don't agree with your vision. And then within a few decades, you have a bunch of ANC voters, again, that only move for the prosperity without sharing the vision that united the people that created that independent state in the first place. How would you mitigate that risk?
Well, look, so I think this comes up a lot. So it's a good one. So first of all, I kind of think it's a slightly bizarre argument. You listen, independence isn't a good idea because you're going to be so successful that everybody's going to want to go there. Seems like a kind of a nice problem to have. But beyond that, look, obviously there is going to have to be a certain amount of well, not a certain amount. There's going to have to be border control and controlled immigration into the Western Cape. And interesting enough, when I first got involved in this project, I kind of didn't like the idea of that. It didn't sit very comfortably with me. But ice cog. So it didn't sit very comfortably with me. But when we did research, the interesting thing was that all three of the ethnic groups in the Western Cape want to have a closed border. For different reasons, they all want to keep different people out, but everybody in the Western Cape wants a closed border. So we're going to end up having a closed border, and only people that can contribute to the welfare of the country are going to come in. So therefore, it's not going to be uncontrolled immigration. Then the other thing is there's a strange concept, and you can see it already happening in the Western Cape, and that is cultural assimilation. So as long as those numbers of people that come in legally and properly through the right channels are in a controlled and sensible manner, then actually people do start to change their philosophy, and you can see that in the Western Cape itself. You know, in the Western Cape, people who come from the Eastern Cape are far less likely to vote for the EFF and far more likely to vote for the DA than anywhere else in the country, because actually once they come across into the Western Cape, then a certain amount of the what I can't think, you know, local culture or traditions or way of life starts to brush off on them. And I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case in the Western Cape. It's obviously already got a character, and yes, there's going to be change over time, but no, I don't see that in 10 years or 15 years time we're going to right back to square one. I see quite the opposite. I think a lot of people are come to the Western Cape and they're going to bring their skills there. I think the Western Cape, if it got independence, would very quickly become a genuine first world country, and you would start to see the eradication of the townships. You would start to see getting close to full employment. You would see a great reduction in poverty, an increase in education, and we've seen everywhere in the world, once those things start to happen, the political climate changes very, very quickly. Look, again, I am an optimist. You'll see I'm optimist on most things. Yes, of course, these things are a risk. It's a risk that's worth taking, but that's not how I see it playing out. I kind of really see the Western Cape flourishing, and actually, not because we're going to focus on inequality, because I don't think that's the right thing to focus on. I think poverty alleviation and creating opportunities is far more important. But by focusing on poverty alleviation and education and employment, you automatically eradicate inequalities. And once we get into a situation that we have a first world country, that I think very people that arrive in the UK don't change the UK into a different country. They get changed into the culture that they're immersed in.
Yeah, well, I think there's a reason. You mentioned at the beginning that it's a criticism that you hear a lot, but I think there's a reason why, because we've seen a lot of cases of that happen in the world where certain regions are more successful than others, not even just bordering countries, and where people then flood to those regions or flood from the rural areas into cities, and then those cities voting in a different way after a few years. So, and I think that is something that you're going to have to give thought. I think it's a genuine risk and we've seen this with DA support in the Western Cape, where there has been a very steady and growing stream of immigration into the Western Cape from, for example, the Eastern Cape, after job opportunities, after better safety, after a lot of the successes that the DA achieved in the Western Cape. And that has actually started changing the way that the Western Cape electorate votes, with the ANC support growing, even though the DA aren't failing. So I do think that is something that's going to be looked at, or have to be looked at, seeing as we're seeing this happen in the Western Cape already.
But look, I'm not sure what numbers you're referring to there, because the ANC vote is at an all-time low in the Eastern Cape, in the Western Cape. It's 28.6% this time, which is the lowest ever. And the DA has seen constant growth. So 20.2% of black people in the Western Cape voted for the DA. So the DA actually has a far stronger vote amongst people from the Eastern Cape than elsewhere. The only time the DA's share of the vote has fallen was in 2019, and that was predominantly from people from the ethnic minorities leaving the DA, because obviously the DA had started to flirt with racial populism under Maimani and so on. So it'll be interesting to see. But the ANC share of the vote is at an all-time low in the Western Cape. Yeah, they peaked at what, 40 something in the in 99. Then it dropped. They averaged 36% since 94. They averaged 31% over the last decade, and they currently have got 28.6% now.
And then another question that I wanted to ask you before our time runs out is this vision of the Western Cape in regards to ideology, in regards to what are you trying to create? Are you trying to create a separate country that is based on the same ideology as the ANC's South Africa, but you're just going to run it efficiently and without corruption? Or are there some very significant ideological differences between you and the current South African zeitgeist? Because I see another criticism that has been raised about your movement is the fact that you're only going to create a smaller version of South Africa, buy yourself some time, and then somewhere down the line you're going to face the same type of problems.
Well, look, and look, yes, that is there, but broadly, that those are accusations that are targeted by what I'm going to call the right, because obviously there are a certain amount of people for whom Cape Independence and a Volksstaat, for argument's sake, are synonymous, which absolutely isn't the case. We absolutely aren't trying to create a country that is a Volksstaat or a country for the minorities. I know some other groups talk about minorities a lot. We absolutely do not. Our point is purely democratic. The people of the Western Cape already want different things. It's clear at the ballot box. 67% of the Western Cape votes for capitalist parties. The rest of South Africa, 73%, I think it is, 73% plus minus votes for socialist-leaning parties. So you've got this massive split between the Western Cape and the rest of South Africa, between capitalist-leaning and free market, and between socialist-leaning policies. And all we want to do is give the Western Cape people a vote. At this point in time, who they vote for is irrelevant, because they get what South Africa votes for anyway. And we want to give the political power to the people of the Western Cape. And I think that's the right thing to do. It's not for us to decide what those policies must be. We have to trust the people of the Western Cape. They've made good decisions so far, so all we want to do is to have elections in the Western Cape where the electorate chooses who the national government is, and whoever they choose is who they actually get. It's still their choice to make. It has to be their choice to make. It can't be our choice as an organisation, and it can't be any one little sort of ethnic or cultural clique that can kind of say, look, we're going to co-opt the Western Cape and make it ours and dictate policy. That can't be the case. This is a democratic country, and the Western Cape will be a democratic country, and the will of the people will reign supreme. And I think people will have to just accept that maybe they support a minority party in the new country. If they do, then that's how democracy works. I think that but let's trust and see that thus far the Western Cape has made very, very good choices at the ballot box. And ironically, let's go further than that and say, look, the Western Cape is 49% coloured, it's 33% black, and it's 16% white. So in the Western Cape, no one ethnicity is going to have absolute control, but the most powerful political force is going to be coloured people. And actually, I don't mind that one bit, because when white people had control, we were racist and we abused our power. And now black people have got control in South Africa. They're racist and they're abusing their power. And actually, thus far, the coloured people have voted predominantly for a party that is accused of being a white party, and they voted responsibly, and it is coloured people that are putting the DA in power in the Western Cape. So at this point in time, of the three ethnicities in South Africa, I would argue quite strongly that the coloured people have been the most moderate and actually have had the best judgment.
Mm. All right, and then my final big question is, let's say you have this referendum. Let's make a hypothetical result. You get the result that 70% of people in this referendum support Cape independence and 30% oppose, and you get your independent Cape. What happens to that 30% that opposed it? Should they simply leave, or what would your message be, or your policy be towards if that large chunk of people, probably millions of people that did not support becoming independent Cape and wanted to still be part of the rest of South Africa? Sure.
Well, look, ultimately, I guess that's going to be their choice. So we only have two policies as an organisation. We absolutely believe that the Western Cape itself must decide what party it wants. So we would see a referendum. After the referendum, we would see elections, and then the parties would come with policies, and the various parties would stand on their own tickets, and the Western Cape electorate would then choose between the parties. I think the most likely outcome is that the DA, if it happened now, the DA are currently running the Western Cape, and I think it's probably unlikely that when we get to the new country that anybody else other than the DA would be the first government there. What happens thereafter remains to be seen. But the two policies that we do have are the ones that we feel are essential for people to know and understand, so they can decide what they feel about an independent Western Cape. And one is, what are the borders? And we've talked about that already. And the other one is who would be citizens. So our movement is entirely inclusive. We're not interested in any division around sort of culture or race or religion, and therefore everybody that's in the Western Cape is welcome. So our position is simply this: that if you're a citizen of South Africa and you're a legal resident, permanent resident in the Western Cape, then you will be able to take up citizenship in the Western Cape if you want to, and if you don't, then you don't have to. Everybody that's there that can stay. We're not looking at throwing anybody out of the country. That 30% that votes against look, I would like that it was so low as 30%. I think Cape Independence is far more marginal than that, and I think if we get independence, it's going to be 51-49 rather than 70-30. But maybe my dreams could come true and we get 70-30. But that 30%, they will still be our people. They will still be our compatriots. And actually, we have to do our best to create the life that they want, the same as the life that we want. And that they will be one with us. So obviously, if they feel that they don't want to be in the Western Cape and they want to leave, that's their choice. But I hope that isn't the case. At the end of the day, I genuinely think that the Western Cape will have an opportunity to really tackle the things that we should have tackled in South Africa, but haven't, because we've made such terrible policy choices. And I honestly see that over a period of maybe 20 or 30 years that we can eradicate third world, second world poverty from that we have in the Western Cape, and we can get rid of the townships, and we can have a broadly middle class populace in a first world country where we've all had good education and we've all got decent jobs, and at that point there's going to be very little to divide us. And I think that 30% might be quite disappointed on day one, but I suspect after 10 or 20 years that 30% will be absolutely overjoyed that they stayed and were part of an independent Western Cape.
All right, Phil, that was a very interesting discussion. We've reached the end of our discussion tonight, but I'll definitely talk to you again in the future. I have to say, frankly, I don't share your optimism in a lot of regards and a lot of factors, but I do have a lot of respect for your bold ideas. I love an anti-establishment thinker anywhere I can find them. And I'm going to definitely be keeping a close eye on your movement and watching it intently. But maybe just as your final thoughts, and as part of that, do you have a stat or a fact that you can give me that if you had to sell this idea of this optimism of yours, what stat or fact would you use to do it?
Well, look, so I haven't really thought about that, but I think probably the one that obviously we'll want to verify in our own polling, but that is that 66% of DA voters in the Western Cape in 2019 wanted a referendum on independence, and that is a staggering number, and it's something that we will verify, but I think that kind of fits in with our feeling, what we're finding, and for me, the putting pressure on the DA to get them to discuss independence and to draw them out, get them off the fence is the key to unpicking this whole thing. Once the DA starts talking about independence openly, then Western Cape starts talking about independence. And at this point in time, I don't really care if people are for or against. We just want to have a rational discussion about this thing. Let's talk about the merits. In the piece that I wrote this morning, that was published in the Daily Friend from the Institute of Race Relations, I finished with a question which said, look, is there anybody out there who can make a reasoned argument why it's better for the people of the Western Cape to stay in a union with South Africa? And my last words were, I yield the floor. And I posted that this morning to all the major politicians, all the journalists. So let's see if anybody can come and make an argument that says the people of the Western Cape are better off being a part of South Africa. Because thus far, nobody has taken me up on that. Nobody has been able to say, actually, as the people of the Western Cape, they'll happily say South Africa's better off with the Western Cape in it, but that's got nothing to do with the Western Cape. What is the best for the people of the Western Cape? And that is the question that nobody seems to answer, and that goes with a killer question. Imagine if we reversed the question about independence and said, look, you know what? If today the Western Cape was an independent country, would you vote to give up your independence and go and join South Africa and be governed by the ANC? And what do you think the vote would be in that referendum?
All right. Well, thank you very much, Phil. This was a very interesting discussion, and thank you very much, everyone that tuned in. If you liked the show and you're new to my channel, you can subscribe for more type discussions like this. You can also leave a like on the video. It really helps a lot. And then, yeah, thank you, Phil. It was very interesting. Like I said, I'm going to be watching your movement intently. And if you that listen wants to keep an eye on their movement, there's a link to Phil's Twitter in the description, but also a link to the website that you can go check out for yourself. And then also go check out their Facebook, as you mentioned. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you for giving us your time, Phil. It was very interesting, and I will definitely have you on in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it. Thanks so much, Ernst.
All right. Cheers, guys. Have a good one. I'll see you on Thursday when I talk to Ian Cameron and Marinus Comfort about their new firearms website that they have created. So cheers, guys. Have a good one. I'll see you Thursday.